It was supposed to be just another night with my best friend, two guys sharing laughs in the hot tub, but when he stepped out of the water and slid onto my lap, everything I thought I knew about us changed in a single breath. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The house was still alive with the faint echoes of laughter from earlier, but now it was just me and him outside, steam rising from the hot tub as the cool night air wrapped around us. We had been best friends for as long as I could remember, from playground dares to teenage mischief and into the mess of adulthood. He was the one person who knew me better than anyone else, or at least I thought he did. I never questioned what we were, never let myself imagine anything beyond the label of best friends. That night, though, as the bubbles stirred the water and the moonlight caught the lines of his face, I felt something unsettled inside me. He leaned back against the edge of the tub, his eyes closing for a moment as he let out a soft sigh, and for some reason I couldn't stop watching him. The way the water ran down his chest, the curve of his smile when he cracked open one eye to check if I was still awake, it was all so familiar, yet suddenly it felt like I was seeing him for the first time. I told myself it was just the late hour, maybe the drinks we had earlier, or the heat of the water making me restless. But the truth was, I couldn't look away from him, and that truth sat heavy in my chest, confusing and terrifying all at once. He shifted closer, just slightly, and our shoulders brushed under the water. It was nothing. It should have been nothing. But I felt every spark of contact like a jolt through my skin. My throat tightened and I looked down, pretending to be fascinated by the ripples moving across the surface, but my mind wouldn't quiet down. All I could think of were the years we had spent together, all the moments that now seemed different when viewed through this lens I had tried to bury. The late-night talks where our voices dropped low, the way his hand lingered on my back after a tough day, the times he looked at me with an intensity one ignored. Had I missed the signs? Or was I just inventing them because of the way my heart was racing now? I wanted to move, to break the closeness, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed still, trapped in the warmth of the water and the pull of something I didn't want to admit. Then, without warning, he stood up. Water cascaded off his skin, glistening in the light, and I froze. He was grinning, shaking his head at something I hadn't heard him say. And before I could process what he was doing, he stepped out of the tub and sat back down, not beside me, but on me. On my lap. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My body stiffened, my mind screamed at me to laugh it off, to push him away, to say something stupid and keep things safe. But nothing came out. He sat there like it was the most natural thing in the world, leaning against me with that same familiar laugh, and I felt my chest ache. I couldn't tell if it was fear or longing. I wanted to ask him why, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt his weight settle against me, felt the water lap around us, felt the warmth of his skin through the thin barrier of my swim shorts. Every second dragged out like an eternity, and my heartbeat was so loud I thought he might hear it. He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes locking onto mine with a softness I couldn't understand. It wasn't teasing. It wasn't careless. It was something else entirely, something that made the air between us heavy and fragile all at once. My chest tightened as I realized I didn't want to move, didn't want to break the moment, even if it terrified me. All I could do was sit there, trapped between the safety of friendship and the unknown pull of something deeper, something I had never dared to believe could be real. And as his smile lingered, easy and unguarded, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had always known what I was only now beginning to admit to myself. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, like a wheel turning too fast, unable to slow down. He was still there, sitting on my lap as if nothing about it was strange, as if this was just another joke, another casual moment between us. But it wasn't casual to me. Every breath I took felt heavier, every heartbeat louder. I tried to steady myself by focusing on the small details, the hiss of the bubbles from the jets, the faint hum of music drifting from inside the house, the cool air brushing against my wet skin, but none of it could distract me from the way his body rested against mine. The closeness was overwhelming, too intimate, and yet I didn't want it to stop. I stared at him, at the way droplets of water slid down his neck, clinging for a moment before falling back into the hot tub. He turned his head, caught me staring, and instead of pulling away he gave me that familiar half-smile, the one that always meant he had a secret or an inside joke ready. My chest tightened because this time it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a question, unspoken, hanging in the air between us. My mind slipped back into old memories before I could stop it. The times we had shared a bed after long nights, too tired to care about the closeness. The way he always held eye contact longer than most people did. The afternoons we'd spend talking about everything and nothing, where I often felt like his attention was heavier than words could explain. Back then, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was desperate for something he couldn't give. But now, with his hand resting gently against my thigh under the water, even if by accident, I wasn't so sure. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease the tension clawing at me. But my voice felt locked in my throat. If I admitted the thoughts racing through my head, I could lose him. Our friendship, our history, everything we had built, it could all fall apart. Yet doing nothing felt impossible. Every second stretched on, my skin burning with awareness. Finally, I managed a laugh, though it came out shaky. "You're heavy, you know," I said, hoping to mask the tremor in my voice. He chuckled, leaning back just enough to look me in the eyes again. "You can handle it," he replied, his tone light, playful. But there was something in his gaze that wasn't light at all. It was steady, searching, as though he was waiting for me to reveal something I had been hiding. The silence that followed his words wasn't awkward, but it was thick, like the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on us. My hands stayed planted on either side of me, gripping the edge of the tub so tightly my knuckles ached, because I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust that if I relaxed, I wouldn't reach for him. I didn't trust that if I leaned forward just a little, I wouldn't press my lips against the water-speckled skin of his shoulder. He shifted again, adjusting his balance, and in doing so his hand brushed against my stomach under the water. My breath hitched so loudly I was certain he heard it. He tilted his head curiously, like he wanted to ask me something but chose not to. Instead, he just stayed there, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him even through the water. My thoughts tangled in circles. Did he know what he was doing? Did he realize what this was doing to me? Or was it all in my head, my longing twisting innocent gestures into something more? I wanted to believe it wasn't just me. I wanted to believe his stillness, his choice to stay exactly where he was, meant something. But fear kept me trapped. Fear of misreading him, fear of ruining the most important connection I had in my life. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm inside, but instead of peace I saw more memories. I saw the way he hugged me longer than necessary the night my heart was broken for the first time. I saw the way he defended me when people made comments that cut too deep. I saw every look, every touch, every word that had felt too loaded to be nothing. And suddenly, I realized I hadn't been blind. I had just been afraid. I opened my eyes and he was still there, watching me quietly, as though he could hear every thought rushing through my head. His lips parted like he was about to speak, then closed again. The sound of the bubbling water filled the space between us, but it wasn't enough to drown out the thundering in my chest. For the first time, I didn't see my best friend as the boy I grew up with, but as the man in front of me, so close, so familiar, and yet suddenly so mysterious. I wanted to ask what he was feeling, if he felt this too. But I couldn't. Not yet. So I stayed silent, caught in the pull of his presence, my body screaming with questions my mouth was too scared to ask. And he stayed there, calm and steady, as though he had all the time in the world to wait for me to find my courage. Fear was the first thing that sank into me, cold and sharp even though the water around us was hot. It clawed at my chest and whispered all the worst-case scenarios in my head. What if I ruined everything? What if this moment was nothing more than a joke to him, another careless sign of comfort between friends that I had twisted into something it wasn't? What if he pulled away and looked at me differently forever? I told myself not to move, not to show him the storm raging inside me, but it was useless. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could feel it where our bodies touched. And yet, even with fear biting at me, I didn't push him away. I didn't want to. I had waited too long, buried too much of myself to walk back now. For years, I had kept the truth locked behind smiles and safe words, pretending our friendship was all I needed. But with him sitting there, leaning against me so easily, that lie was starting to fall apart. I couldn't pretend anymore that I lifted my hand without thinking, almost like it belonged to someone else, and brushed the side of his jaw with my fingertips. It was such a small touch, light enough that he could have ignored it, pretended it never happened. But he didn't. His eyes fluttered shut, just for a second, as though he had been waiting for it. That tiny reaction stole the breath from my lungs. My hand trembled, caught between pulling back in fear and pressing forward in hope. I wanted to trace the line of his cheekbone, to memorize every angle of his face with my touch, but I froze. My courage faltered at the edge of possibility, like a diver standing at the brink of a cliff, staring down at the water but too terrified to leap. That he murmured my name then, his voice low and almost unsteady. Hearing it that way, gentle, fragile, stripped of the usual confidence, made my stomach twist. It was as if he was asking for permission without saying the words, as if he was letting me know he felt something too but didn't know how to show it. His body was so close, his warmth bleeding into mine, but I noticed the slightest tremor in his shoulders. He was shaking. I had never seen him nervous before. Not in fights, not in heartbreaks, not even when life had thrown him its hardest punches. But here, with me, he was trembling. That alone told me more than any words could that I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to say, "You're not alone. I've felt this too." I wanted to confess how many times I had imagined something like this, how often I had bitten back feelings to protect what we had. The words burned at the back of my throat, desperate to escape, but they stayed trapped. Fear wouldn't let me set them free. Instead, I leaned forward just slightly until our foreheads touched, and in that silence, everything we had never said seemed to echo louder than words. His breath brushed against my skin, uneven and raw, and I matched mine to his until we found a rhythm. The world outside that hot tub ceased to exist. There were no parties, no people, no expectations. There was only the sound of water lapping gently around us and the sync of our breathing. Time bent in that moment, stretching so slowly it felt like it might never move forward again. My entire life seemed to collapse into that single space between us. All the years of friendship, the memories, the laughter, the tears, they weren't erased. They weren't threatened. Instead, they seemed to be leading here, to this fragile, uncertain, yet undeniable point of connection that I stayed perfectly still, afraid that even a wrong breath would shatter the spell. His hand, the one resting against my side, curled just slightly, fingers pressing into me like an anchor. It wasn't bold, it wasn't possessive, it was simply grounding, as if to remind me that he was real and here. I felt the weight of it, the unspoken reassurance that maybe I wasn't alone in this madness. The silence between us grew heavy but not unbearable. It was the kind of silence that hummed with meaning, the kind you didn't want to break because you knew words could never measure up. Inside me, something began to shift. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it dulled, softened under the weight of his closeness. In its place came a spark of something braver, something that whispered maybe this wasn't a mistake, maybe this was exactly where I was meant to be. I didn't speak, I couldn't. But I let my body stay open, I let my heart rest against his, and I let the moment carry us. We weren't laughing. We weren't filling the space with easy chatter the way we always did. We were simply being, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. The minutes passed like hours, or maybe they were seconds, I couldn't tell. What I did know was that something had shifted forever. Whether or not I found the courage to say it out loud, we had crossed a line we could never go back from. And strangely, instead of panicking, I felt calm. There, in the quiet, in his arms, I realized that even if I couldn't name what was happening yet, I didn't want it to stop. I wanted to live inside that heartbeat, inside that closeness, for as long as he'd let me. A nervous laugh escaped me before I could stop it, sharp and thin, the kind of laugh that comes when your body doesn't know what else to do. The sound seemed to break whatever invisible tension had been hanging over us, and his lips tugged into a smile, soft at first and then wider, like he was relieved too. I muttered something stupid, something about the hot tub being too hot, and he laughed, not at me but with me, as though the excuse I gave him was enough to cover the storm between us. For a moment, that laugh steadied me. It reminded me of all the years we had spent laughing at nothing, turning meaningless comments into private jokes that no one else could understand. It reminded me of how safe he had always felt, how natural, how easy. Yet tonight it wasn't just ease I felt, it was weight, gravity, a pull I couldn't resist anymore. My heart ached in a way it hadn't before, aching not from fear now but from a kind of joy I didn't know how to contain. That I looked at him in the dim light, really looked at him, and every memory I had of hiding myself seemed to press against my ribs. How many times had I stared at him when he wasn't looking? How many times had I swallowed down words I wanted to say, choosing silence because I was terrified of what honesty might destroy? I had become so used to pretending that I didn't even realize how heavy that pretending had become until it started to lift. Sitting there with him, his weight against me, his forehead brushing mine, I felt a door open inside me that I had kept locked for years. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I didn't know if I had the courage to walk through it completely, but I knew I couldn't go back to who I was before tonight. That he moved then, only slightly, but enough for me to notice. He leaned his head forward until our foreheads pressed together again, a gesture so small and yet so intimate that my entire body froze. I could feel the warmth of his skin, the wetness of his hair dripping down onto me, the faint tremble in his breath. He wasn't joking. He wasn't teasing. He wasn't careless. This was intentional. This was real. His hand lifted under the water, sliding across my side until his fingers curled lightly against me, and I thought my chest might burst. There were no fireworks, no dramatic words, no sudden confessions. Just him, steady and quiet, giving me the smallest piece of truth, and me, clinging to it like it was the only thing that mattered. The silence stretched long, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a conversation all on its own, one where everything I had been too afraid to say was already understood. My body relaxed into his, the tension I had been holding slipping away slowly, like air leaving a balloon. For once, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow or the risks or what labels this would give us. I wasn't worrying about friends, about family, about the world outside that backyard. All I was thinking about was him, and the way it felt to finally be here with him like this. Then, like it came from somewhere deep inside him, he whispered words I never thought I would hear. "I'm here," he said, his voice quiet but certain, and before I could even process it, he added, "And I'm yours." The words landed in me like stones dropped into water, sinking deep, creating ripples that spread through every part of me. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My throat closed up, my chest filled with a pressure I didn't know how to release. For so long, I had imagined what it would be like to hear him say something like that, but in every dream it felt impossible, a fantasy I would never touch. And now here it was, given to me so simply, as if he had been holding it all along. That I closed my eyes, afraid that if I kept them open, the moment might dissolve into nothing, like waking from a dream. My forehead stayed pressed to his, our breaths mingling, our bodies close, and I let myself absorb every detail, the rhythm of his breathing, the steadiness of his hand on me, the warmth of his voice still echoing in my ears. The fear was still there, small and sharp, but it had been drowned out by something bigger, something stronger. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just hoping. I wasn't just wishing. I was living in it, in the truth, in the possibility that the person I had loved in silence for so long might have been holding that same love for me that we didn't kiss. We didn't make any grand gestures. But it didn't matter. What passed between us in that quiet moment was more powerful than any kiss could have been. It was honesty, finally. It was connection without walls. It was the truth we had both been too scared to say out loud, spoken now not just in words but in closeness, in stillness, in the decision not to pull away. I held on to it tightly, afraid to let it go, because I knew deep down this was the beginning of something I had waited my whole life for. And as the night wrapped around us, I let myself believe, for the first time, that maybe this was exactly where we were always meant to end up. The world beyond the backyard seemed to vanish, as though the party inside the house, the laughter that had once filled the air, and even the rest of our lives no longer existed. There was only him, sitting there in my lap, and the weight of what had just happened between us. The night felt endless, stretched wide open, and yet everything seemed fragile too, like one wrong word could shatter it. My phone buzzed from where I had set it down on the side of the hot tub, the light flashing in the dark, a reminder that there was still a world waiting for us beyond this moment. Neither of us moved to check it. Neither of us even glanced toward it. It could have been the most important message in the world, but nothing could have mattered more than the closeness we were wrapped in right then that he shifted slightly, his thigh brushing against mine, and the contact made my stomach tighten. I tried to steady my breathing, to hide how much his nearness was affecting me, but it was impossible. Every move he made, every time his skin grazed mine under the water, it was like an entire conversation passing between us without words. My arms, unsure of what to do, finally gave in and moved around him, pulling him closer in a way that felt both terrifying and natural at the same time. He didn't resist. He didn't laugh it off or tease me like I half expected him to. Instead, he settled into me, his body fitting against mine as though this was the way it was always supposed to be. His breath brushed my neck, hot and uneven, sending shivers racing down my spine despite the warmth of the water. He whispered then, his voice so quiet I almost thought I had imagined it. "I've always been scared of telling the truth." The words cracked something open inside me. For years, I had carried the weight of my own silence, burying my feelings because I thought I had no choice. To hear him say it too, to hear that he had been hiding his truth, made my chest ache in a way that was both painful and comforting. I turned my head slightly, my lips brushing the edge of his damp hair, and whispered back, but not to me. He froze at my words, just for a heartbeat, and then his entire body seemed to relax against mine. It was like he had been holding his breath for years and finally let it go. His hand, which had been resting tentatively on my side, slid further around me, gripping me with a quiet desperation that told me everything his mouth couldn't. My own grip tightened around him, and for a moment we weren't two people fumbling through fear and confusion, we were just two souls finally allowed to meet in the open. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with small sounds, the steady rhythm of our breathing, the faint hum of the filter in the hot tub, the subtle shift of water as we adjusted against each other. But beneath all of that, there was something deeper. Whispers that weren't spoken aloud but were still heard, promises that weren't made but still understood. It felt like we were telling each other everything we had never said, not with words but with touch and presence that I could feel his heartbeat through his chest, pressed against me. It was fast, unsteady, just like mine, and that made me braver. I whispered small things into the space between us, half-formed words, fragments of feelings that I had never dared to say before. I told him I had been scared too, that I had hidden too much of myself because I thought the world wouldn't accept it. I told him I didn't know where this was going, but I knew I wanted it, wanted him, wanted this feeling of being seen and held without judgment. He listened, quietly, his breath steady against me, and when I finished, he simply whispered, "Me too." The way he said it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some grand confession or sweeping declaration. It was simple, almost shy, but it carried more weight than anything else he had ever said to me. Me too. 2 words that told me he understood, that he felt it as deeply as I did, that I wasn't alone. My eyes burned, though I wasn't sure if it was from tears or just the overwhelming rush of relief. I pressed my face against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. That we stayed like that for what felt like hours, though it might have only been minutes. The world around us was forgotten, and all that mattered was that I was holding him, and he was letting me. The fear of what would come tomorrow, what our friends might say, what our families might think, how this would change everything, lingered at the edges of my mind, but it didn't matter tonight. Tonight, there was only us. Tonight, we didn't need answers or labels. Tonight, we only needed the truth we had finally shared. That as the night stretched on, I realized something I had never admitted to myself before. I had always thought I wanted a big moment, a dramatic declaration, some grand sign that love was real and possible. But what I wanted, what I had always truly wanted, was exactly this: the quiet certainty of someone choosing me in the silence, someone trusting me enough to let their guard down, someone who could sit in my arms and whisper, "Me too," and mean it. And with that realization, I held him tighter, knowing deep down that no matter what came next, I would carry this moment with me forever. Eventually, the heat of the water wrapped so heavy around us that we had no choice but to move. Our bodies had grown flushed, our skin warm to the point of discomfort, though neither of us wanted to break the closeness we had fallen into. He shifted first, his hands gliding against mine under the surface as he pushed himself up, and the sudden loss of his weight in my lap made me feel almost hollow, like something essential had been pulled away. He stepped out of the tub, water streaming down his body in rivulets, catching the faint light from the porch. I followed him, slower, my legs shaky, my chest still full with everything that had happened between us. The night air was cool against my overheated skin, raising goosebumps along my arms, but it only made me more aware of the towel he tossed toward me, of the way his eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. That we sat side by side on the wooden steps that led back into the house, both wrapped in towels, dripping water onto the old planks. Steam rose off our skin in soft curls, blurring the space between us. I wanted to say something, to acknowledge what had passed, but my voice felt locked inside me again. For so long, silence had been my prison, and now it felt like it was also the safest place to hide. So instead of speaking, I watched the way the night sky stretched above us, stars scattered like pieces of a truth I couldn't yet name. Beside me, he shifted closer, and without thinking, I leaned into him, my shoulder pressing against his. That small contact was enough to steady me. He let his arm fall casually around my shoulders, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, but the warmth of it sank deeper than any casual gesture could. I felt wrapped in something I had been chasing my entire life but never knew how to hold. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was safe. It was the kind of quiet that made me feel like words weren't necessary, like maybe words would only cheapen the meaning of the moment. I found myself breathing slower, matching his rhythm, grounding myself in the steady rise and fall of his chest. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence. I just wanted to live in it. After a while, I couldn't help but whisper, "Can we do this?" The words came out softer than I intended, almost broken, but they carried every question I had been too afraid to ask. Can we be more than this? Can we take what just happened and carry it into tomorrow? Can I trust you not to disappear if I let my heart fall into your hands? My voice trembled, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded, but before I could regret saying it, he squeezed my shoulder with his arm and pulled me closer against him. His reply was quiet, but there was no hesitation. "Only if you want this too." The simplicity of his answer nearly undid me. No promises of forever, no pressure, no weight I wasn't ready to carry, just the choice, given back to me, as though he knew how much it mattered that I felt in control of this leap. My lips curved into a small, shaky smile, and I let out a soft laugh, one that was part relief and part disbelief. I whispered, the words barely audible but truer than anything I had ever said in my life. I wanted this, I wanted him, I wanted the chance to finally live without the mask I had worn for so long. Saying it aloud felt like opening a locked door and stepping into a world I had always been too scared to enter. He didn't answer right away, and he didn't need to. His hand moved gently across my shoulder until his fingers brushed against the side of my neck, lingering there, grounding me in the warmth of his touch. He leaned his head against mine, and I felt his smile without having to see it. In that moment, everything felt simple. There was no world beyond the two of us, no complications, no fear of what tomorrow would bring. There was only this quiet night, the two of us sitting on the steps with damp towels and damp hair, and a truth that had been waiting years to be spoken out loud. That I thought of the times I had imagined this, the countless moments when I had daydreamed about what it would feel like to be chosen by him, to be seen in this way. In every fantasy, I had pictured it as some grand, sweeping moment, dramatic and undeniable. But this was so much smaller than that, so ordinary, and yet it was more powerful than any fantasy I could have dreamed. It was real. It was raw. It was happening. And that was enough to make my entire body hum with the kind of joy I had never believed I would feel. The night stretched around us, the world so quiet it felt like it was holding its breath for us. I leaned further into him, letting his arm hold me steady, and I thought to myself that maybe this was what it meant to be home. Not a place, not a building, but a person. A person who knew all of me, the hidden parts and the broken parts, and still stayed. A person who looked at me the way he was looking at me now, like I wasn't just his best friend anymore, like I was something more, something worth holding on to. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how this would change everything we knew about ourselves, but for the first time I wasn't terrified of the future. I was willing to face it, as long as he was sitting beside me, his arm around my shoulders, his presence steady and certain in a world that had always felt uncertain. And as the night deepened and the stars above us shone brighter, I whispered again, this time to myself, I want. And I knew, without a doubt, that I meant it with every piece of me. The night had ended long ago, but the memory of it carried into the next morning like a secret that lived beneath my skin. I woke up in my room, still feeling the ghost of his arm around me, still hearing the whisper of his words, still tasting the silence that had wrapped us so tightly together. The sunlight streaming through the blinds made everything look sharper, more real, and with that came the weight of questions I had pushed away the night before. What were we now? Was it a moment, a slip of emotions, or had something between us truly changed forever? My chest tightened as I lay there staring at the ceiling, knowing that no matter how badly I wanted to believe this was simple, nothing about it would be. Not with him being my best friend, not with the years of pretending we were only one thing when underneath it all, I had been hiding the truth. When I walked into the kitchen later, he was already there, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee in his hands. His hair was a mess, sticking out in every direction, his shirt slightly wrinkled like he had pulled it on without much thought. He looked like himself, and yet something about him felt different. Maybe it was the way his eyes caught mine and held them, unflinching, unafraid. Usually mornings were filled with easy banter, jokes, and teasing, but today, the air was heavier, quieter, as if we both knew what had happened couldn't be ignored. I poured myself a cup of coffee just to have something to do with my hands, my movements too careful, my breaths too shallow. Finally, he broke the silence. Do you regret it? His voice was low, almost casual, but I heard the sharp edge hidden underneath, the fear that matched my own. That I set the mug down, my fingers tightening around the ceramic. The truth was tangled inside me, messy and overwhelming, but it wasn't regret. It was fear, yes, and uncertainty, but not regret. I turned to face him fully, meeting his eyes, and shook my head. No. I don't. The way his shoulders relaxed at that, the way he let out a slow breath he must have been holding since last night, made my chest ache. He smiled then, small and tentative, the kind of smile that carried both relief and vulnerability, and I knew right then that this wasn't just me. He felt it too, that we sat across from each other at the small table, neither of us touching our coffee, both of us staring at the space between us as though it held the answers we needed. It was him who spoke first again, his voice steadier this time. "I don't know what this makes us." His honesty disarmed me, because it mirrored my own confusion. I laughed softly, shaking my head, and admitted, "I don't either." For a long moment we sat there in the weight of our uncertainty, but beneath it, there was something steady, something that told me it didn't matter if we didn't have the words yet. The only thing that mattered was that it was real. The day carried on in fragments of normality, as though we were both testing whether the world would shatter if we acted like nothing had happened. We cleaned up the mess from the night before, the empty bottles and forgotten plates, our hands brushing accidentally as we worked. Every small touch carried more meaning than it ever had before, and every time it happened, I caught his eyes lingering on me just a second longer than usual. It was maddening, thrilling, terrifying all at once. By the afternoon, I couldn't take the silence between us anymore. We ended up back on the porch, the same spot where the night had unfolded, and I finally asked the question that had been burning in me since the morning. "Were you serious?" He frowned slightly, like he wasn't sure what I meant, so I pushed further. "Last night. Everything you said. Everything you did. Were you serious?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the summer heat pressing against us. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might retreat, laugh it off, or call it a mistake. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at me with a rawness I had never seen before. "I've been serious for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it." His words hit me like a tidal wave, crashing into every wall I had built around my heart. My chest ached with the weight of all the years I had convinced myself it was impossible, that I was alone in this. To hear him say he had felt it too, it was both beautiful and heartbreaking, because of all the time we had lost pretending that I reached for him then, without thinking, my hand brushing against his. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand so our fingers laced together, the contact simple but full of everything we couldn't yet say. We sat there like that, holding on as though the world outside didn't exist. For the first time, I let myself imagine what it could mean if we stopped pretending, if we actually let ourselves be what we had always wanted. It wasn't just about attraction. It was about years of trust, years of knowing each other better than anyone else, years of building something that had quietly become the foundation of our lives, but with the possibility came the fear. I couldn't ignore it, and neither could he. What would people say? How would our families react? How would our friends, the ones who had only ever known us as best friends, see us if they knew? The thought of it made my stomach twist. Yet when I looked at him, his thumb brushing softly across my knuckles, I realized that maybe the fear would always be there. Maybe the point wasn't to wait until it disappeared. Maybe the point was to face it together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting everything in golden light, I leaned closer to him and whispered, "If we do this, it won't be easy." He nodded, his eyes steady on mine, and replied, "Nothing worth it ever is." His words settled into me like a promise, not loud or dramatic, but strong enough to anchor me. In that moment, I knew we had crossed a line we could never go back from. We weren't just best friends anymore. We weren't just two people fumbling in the dark. We were something else now, something fragile, something terrifying, something real. And as he squeezed my hand tighter, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope between the life we had always known and the one we had finally admitted we wanted. On the surface, everything looked the same. We laughed at stupid jokes, we played video games until sunrise, we grabbed fast food in the middle of the night just because we could. But underneath all of it, something had shifted. There was a current running between us now, undeniable and constant, pulling us closer even when we tried to act like nothing had changed. Every glance lasted longer than it should, every brush of skin sparked something in me that I could no longer ignore. I was living in two worlds at once, the old comfort of our friendship and the new, trembling reality of something deeper. And it was terrifying, because I had no idea how to balance both without losing everything. One evening, we found ourselves alone again, sitting in his room with music playing softly in the background. He was sprawled out across the bed, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, while I sat in the chair by his desk, pretending to focus on something I wasn't really seeing. My chest felt tight with the weight of words I still hadn't said. I thought back to all the times I had sat in that very chair, hiding my feelings, convincing myself I'd never be brave enough to speak them. Now, after everything we had shared, I couldn't go back to silence. My voice was unsteady when I finally spoke. Do you ever think about what people will say about us? He put his phone down and looked at me, his expression thoughtful, not surprised. It was like he had been waiting for me to ask. All the time, he admitted. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't scare me. His honesty cut through me, because it was the same fear that had been clawing at my chest since the night in the hot tub. But, he continued, sitting up straighter, his eyes locking on mine with a quiet intensity, I care more about what this means to me than what it means to them. His words made something inside me ache, like a wound being touched and healed at the same time that I moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed, close enough that our knees brushed. What if we're not strong enough? I asked, my voice breaking a little. He leaned closer, his hand finding mine, his thumb moving in slow circles against my skin. Then we'll get stronger. Together. It was such a simple answer, but it held a certainty I had never been able to find on my own. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that what we had could survive the questions, the doubts, the whispers that would inevitably follow us. And maybe it wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it was about choosing each other in spite of the fear. The next weekend, we went out with some of our friends, and for the first time, I noticed how differently I saw everything now. The way he sat next to me, the way he laughed at my jokes, the way his hand brushed against mine on the table, all of it carried a secret meaning only we knew. Nobody else noticed, but to me, it felt like the room was brighter, louder, more alive because of him. I caught him looking at me more than once, and each time, his gaze lingered long enough to make my heart race. It was intoxicating and dangerous at the same time, like playing with fire in a crowded room. Later that night, when it was just the two of us again, the weight of it all caught up with me. We were sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside his window. I turned to him, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't keep bottled anymore. I've wanted this for so long, I whispered. The silence that followed was thick, stretching between us like a thread pulled taut, until he finally replied, his voice soft but steady. Me too. That admission, so simple yet so powerful, broke something open inside me. Years of longing, years of fear, years of convincing myself I was alone, it all dissolved in that moment that I leaned in, closing the space between us, and this time, when our lips met, it wasn't tentative or uncertain. It was full of everything we had been holding back, everything we had been too afraid to show. The kiss was slow, deep, and unhurried, like we had all the time in the world. His hands cupped my face, gentle but firm, grounding me in a way nothing else ever had. I felt like I was finally breathing after years of holding my breath. When we pulled apart, our foreheads resting together, I couldn't stop smiling, even as tears stung the corners of my eyes. This is real, I whispered, needing to hear it out loud. He nodded, his breath warm against my skin. It's real. And in that moment, I knew it didn't matter what anyone else thought. It didn't matter how hard it might be, or how many people might not understand. What mattered was this, us, here, together, finally unafraid to hold on to what we had always been too scared to reach for. As the night stretched on, we lay side by side, our hands still intertwined, and for the first time in years, I felt a deep, quiet peace settle inside me. Not the kind that comes from pretending, not the fragile kind that shatters under pressure, but the kind that comes from truth. From knowing you are exactly where you're meant to be, with exactly who you're meant to be with. The world outside was still uncertain, and tomorrow would still hold its challenges, but tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, it was just us. And that was enough.